I was invited to play through The War Within Alpha by Blizzard, and I had to sign an NDA, but we got a lot of information as to what was actually going to be showing up for The War Within and kind of what we were going to be able to see come the first patch of the alpha. I think for a lot of people, they don't necessarily know what to expect with the alpha, or if this is your first alpha cycle that you're maybe closely following, this is kind of what was available for testing. First and foremost, you could level 70 to 72 through one zone. That's fairly standard. There was 2 dungeons that were available for testing. These dungeons, I have gameplay footage that I'm going to show in B-roll in a little bit, but they were pretty good, all things considered. There were also 3 delves, which we saw at BlizzCon. Delves are basically the solo player experience of the expansion, kind of similar. I wouldn't call it like Torghast, but I would say they're the solo player experience of the expansion. The delve is also replacing the PvP slot in the vault, and so the delves are going to be able to give you gear that's, I think, heroic item level equivalent via the vault. And so that's that solo player experience that Blizzard is be looking to go for. In addition to that, every single specialization had at least 1 hero talent available for testing. I think there might have been a couple specs that this is not true for. I think like Assassination Rogue that might not have been true for, but almost every other spec had at least 1 hero talent that was available for testing, which is a bit surprising considering that, not all of them have been announced or anything, and just being able to at least have 1 is unprecedented relative to Blizzard's cadence in the past. And then there was also pretty extensive talent changes for some classes that wasn't previously announced, such as like Druid and Monk and Warrior, all got pretty extensive talent changes, all things considered. And so whenever you look at what's available for testing now, we can kind of compare this to the state of previous alphas, where for previous alpha states, Dragonflight had 5 to 10 specs with the new talents, which was not very much. They had evokers that were on release, but they didn't have any dungeons. They did have leveling for 1 zone, and then they had dragon riding. And so that was fairly standard. Shadowlands was a bit of a fiesta where it was all old talents. Basically, nobody's talents had changed. No covenants, no soulbinds, no conduits, none of the systems, no Torghast, none of that. They did have 2 dungeons that were available with Spires of Ascension and Necrotic Wake, but that was pretty much it. And so Shadowlands didn't have that much, all things considered. And so looking at what's available for The War Within, The War Within has twice as much content on the release version of the alpha as the past, which is quite exciting. And I will say I'm pretty stoked for that. Let's talk about how is it? Because that's probably the most important thing. And we're going to talk about everything that I kind of learned about The War Within alpha. I'm not super lore inclined. And so whenever I was leveling through, I wasn't necessarily reading the quests. But the leveling process feels fairly standard. I think the zones are incredibly pretty, which is something that I will comment on. And I think that dynamic flying through the zones feels like an absolute win. You're able to mount previous mounts that you weren't able to use. And so I think that being able to, use flight form or use any of your favorite mounts from the past that were previously flying mounts, that'll be a super strong feature for the expansion. Being able to fly dragon ride through it, I think is going to make the process really good. They also have dragon riding points again, as well as soaring points. I think they got renamed. Most of the stuff that was previously dragon flight themed got named to be a bit more generic for The War Within, just to get away from the dragon riding moniker. It's now dynamic flying, right? The delves, so there was 3 delves available for testing. I would say that they were Withered Training and Visions of N'Zoth-esque, where it was supposed to be a solo player experience. I think that with what they have for testing right now, it's really hard to gauge how interesting it's going to be. I think one of the things about Withered Training and Visions of N'Zoth that was actually so cool was as time went on, you got a bit more powerful inside of those scenarios, and that made it better. This is supposed to have that as well. As you do more delves, you're supposed to be able to level up your delve companions. And as your delve companions get levels, they're able to gain more abilities, they're able to gain more skills, and they're supposed to be a bit more powerful to help you inside of these delves. They also have 3 tiers where it's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Right now, only tier 1 and tier 2 were available on alpha. They were leveling tiers pretty clearly, and they were fairly easy. And as you increase the tiers of the delves that you're doing, you're supposed to be able to get higher eye level gear. I think that delves in the current iteration, it's really hard to tell, but I think that they absolutely can be cool as good single player content. They're incentivizing them well with a good reward structure. You're also able to get end of delve rewards. I don't know what the item level equivalent of that is going to be, but it's probably going to be, world gear. And so if you're a single player open world content style player, I think that these delves are going to be pretty sick. I hope that the content feels good and is repeatable. But as it currently stands, I think that they felt pretty good. I think it's, again, hard to tell on a first pass on an alpha. I played through all 3 delves. I don't have like a super extensive experience, but they feel good. Then that's kind of where I land. And whenever I'm like assessing these things, I'm like, how much fun did I have? I had a decent amount of fun through the delves. They weren't that long. I would say probably about 10 to 15 minutes at the most. And so, and the mobs kind of like died. They kind of flopped a little bit, so they weren't like super hard, especially at tier 1. Classes. I would say that classes feel a lot more finished than they have in previous alphas, with a lot of hero talents being implemented. I would say I'm a bit surprised considering this is the first wave of alpha. I know that in the past, people had questioned Blizzard's ability to be able to get expansions out on time due to class design a lot of the time. I think that class design was the one that people were like, this doesn't feel like this is going to be ready. Shadowlands had a major criticism of like, this is not going to be ready on time. This is not going to be ready on time. And then Blizzard had to delay the expansion because it wasn't ready. The Dragonflight, people started really early saying that Dragonflight wasn't going to be ready, even though it was mostly only class talent trees that weren't ready, whereas like the rest of the game was kind of ready. Whereas this feels like it's, the closest to being able to be a shippable product as I've ever seen for an alpha. And that a lot of it comes down to the classes. They feel a lot more finished. There's a decent amount of reworks that have already happened. The hero talents are by and large finished. Now, perfected, I would say, is a far cry from what they are. And there is a question as to whether or not hero talents should have been a system that was in the game or is going to be in the game in the War Within, but Blizzard is going ahead with that, almost regardless of what the feedback is going to say. But the hero talents are available for testing by and large, and a lot of them that have been available for testing, while they haven't been perfect, at least they're available, right? And they're finished in that regard. And so the classes as a whole, it's a lot more polished than you've seen in the past. And I think that their immediate reworking of some specializations or changing to some specializations as well before like halfway through the beta, that's also sick. I think that that's something that they do far too late in some situations, and then they don't give themselves enough time to make sure to perfect it, but doing it this far in advance is awesome. Dungeons, I would say that, they were leveling dungeons. I think talking about mechanics is pretty pointless. Equating them to Mythic Plus is also not very fruitful, since they're like normal dungeons. I think that they felt fine whenever we were playing through them. I played through it with, Mira's Roger, Dorky, and Growl, played through both of the dungeons that were available. And I thought that the mechanics seemed okay. I thought the aesthetic of both of the dungeons that we were able to play was also sick, especially that B dungeon. I thought that was super cool. I guess there looked like there might be some profession-related buffs in the B dungeon, but I didn't have an opportunity to go and check and see what the profession stuff was going to actually entail or what it was going to do. It could be absolutely nothing. Or it could be something that's a bit more pivotal or impactful. I don't like profession stuff in Mythic Plus dungeons just in general, but like I think that for leveling dungeons and for normal dungeons is totally fine. I think that what we got and what we saw with the normal dungeons was awesome. They felt like they had a lot of polish to the normal dungeons, especially compared to the past, and they were pretty cool to play. I'm not going to complain at all in the slightest for what the dungeons were. And that's kind of all what we saw with the War Within Alpha. Mycopia is very high. I think the War Within looks super sick. Aesthetically, the zones look awesome. I don't think that I'm gonna experience the delves a ton. I'm not in love with the hero talents, but God, I love new content in World of Warcraft. I think that this is the best that an alpha has ever looked, ever. And I think that even though I still have concerns, I'm starting to get really excited for the new expansion and really excited to play through what's going on next. If you liked the content, I would subscribe. I'm going to be releasing a couple of more, play tests through the dungeons, kind of talking about the Moonkin talents, the Druid rework as well. I'm going to be releasing a lot of videos and related to the alpha content that I was able to record over the next couple of days. I'm not going to, post 5 videos today. I'm going to release it over the next couple of days. So I would subscribe and make sure to check out the content for the next couple of days, just so you guys can see as well. Additionally, there's also supposed to be a lot of interviews that are going to be posted as well today. And so I'm going to take some time after all of the interviews are posted and probably record a video tomorrow after this is published. And that'll probably be tomorrow's video, just kind of talking about the interviews and talking about the stuff that I want to talk about from the interviews. Because again, I'm not huge into the leveling process, and I don't know a lot about the lore. So those things would not be something that I'm necessarily covering a ton. But the things that I want to talk about, I'm definitely going to cover in the interview. So if you want to see that, make sure to check out the video tomorrow. Goodbye.